Hello again, and welcome back to From Culture to Curature. As you can tell, I'm a bit troubled today, um, and I can't wait to share it with you. We we usually in this platform talk about the journey from culture to curature, and we oftentimes invite members of our conversations during the week to join us. Um, this week is a little different. I decided that I'd just have this conversation with you alone, and that out of sequence, I'd share some information reminding us of some of the sessions we had this past week. Many of you know I am very clear about when I am providing my own opinion, when I'm reviewing my own research, albeit all of this is a form of research because I'm learning and we're recording and we're gathering information from our community as we move through this journey. But at least in this particular moment, it's not formal research. We didn't predetermine our methodology. We didn't select our hypothesis. We didn't draft a formal pathway that we are going to use to gather information. But that doesn't mean it's not research. I mean, experience is research, right? You learn, and we all have heard about awareness, decision, commitment, and how as our awareness grows, so do our decisions evolve and our commitments, right? Our commitments become permanent or consistent, at least as it relates to that point in time. So I'll tell you what's troubling me. And just for the record, for those of you who are new, I'm Dr. Mark Ali, population health and implementation scientist. And quite frankly, I'm disturbed today. And so you're getting this very unscripted report from me because I couldn't wait to get to you all to talk about this. So today we're going to do it differently. I'm going to share what happened in terms of a particular conversation that was had. And then I'm going to invite you to chime in on your thoughts. I don't have an audience today live. As I said, it's just me and you here on this video. So I'll tell you what happened. I hosted a conversation with a group of women. Doesn't matter how many, let's say it was more than 10, right? And we were reviewing the idea of relationships. It's a lot to talk about there, right? And they all knew that. We all knew that we weren't going to solve the family crisis in the Black community with a single session about relationships. So, as you know, I started somewhere. I started what I thought was at the very top, at the very beginning. And I asked a question, all women, ages ranging 20, I think she was 20, up to about 70. Okay, so it was a broad range, which I'm going to speak to just briefly in a moment, in a sentence or two, about how relevant that is. But I asked them, those married, those single, didn't matter. And if they're married, they can certainly throw out the disclaimer, well, before I was married, I blah, blah, blah. And my question was, how do you imagine, or how did you imagine your partner to be? And what lifestyle did you hope to gain? And you don't necessarily, I didn't require them necessarily to speak to what actually transpired for those who were married already and had a lifestyle, of course, a life, even some of them having partners that transitioned. Sorry. But I asked, so what did you imagine in a partner, and what did that lifestyle, what was the lifestyle that was joined to that? It was sort of a loaded question because, as I said, it wasn't designed to allow the participant to be uh, uh, more neutral or to have an objective opinion, because there's a lot of assumptions in the way the question is asked. Um, it assumes that you even want a partner or had a partner or had an imagination of that, right? First of all, right? So I just wanted to hear the responses. So I'm gonna skip a lot of the details and try to keep to some of the major points, and then how I got disturbed. Okay. Um, so as the conversation went on, and because I gave them a few minutes to think about it, I didn't want people to answer in the moment. I wanted them to reconsider how they've evolved mentally and how they've matured, how while they may have been in their 20s and how different it may be now, that they're older, right? Because I wanted them to give me one answer. What they said was quite revealing. Um, and so I'm going to tell you about some of the images while they were thinking about what their answer would be. I presented on the screen, also polluting or infecting or guiding their thoughts. And we know in a formal research, you wouldn't do that, right? So I'm just being very clear. This is not an example of any type of formal research we were doing. We were just having what we feel is a very healing kind of conversation. So let me get to it. So I asked them, what in your mind would your partner look like? And therefore, what would your lifestyle be? What did you think your lifestyle would be? And I gave them some time to think about it. And I put a couple of images, just slowly started adding rows of images. In the first row, I had an image of a man. They were all Black people. This was a Black man. And he looked like what one would assume is some type of professional, someone who's affluent or what have you, and someone who's strong. In the image, that's what I wanted to convey. Um, and then a arrow was pointed from that person over to what would be the what would be their lifestyle. And that lifestyle of this professional, this very successful, affluent man, translated to, in the picture, a woman who was adorned with jewelry, had a background of lavish luxury, and things like that. Under there was another, and you could probably see where I went with this, another image of a man who may not have been like a professional, but was otherwise still a very successful person as an entrepreneur of such, right? He may have been, if you look at the picture, you may have thought of him as like a boss of like a blue collar a business, but he was the boss, like the owner. And then it translated to a woman who had a similar lifestyle to the one above, and I'll go down some. So you ultimately get to men who had these different profiles and the assumption of what the woman life might have been if she was coupled with that person. Well, I'll tell you the background. I intentionally made the relationship or the background, the image of the woman that resulted, uh, an image whereby the woman went from having all this luxury behind her and all of this lavish life, but she was standing in the middle and she was standing there alone. And as I went down the images for the men, the images for the women became more and more familial, more and more communal, more and more where she wasn't necessarily standing alone, but she went from standing alone to having children around her. She didn't have the luxury, she didn't have all that, but there were family. There were people standing by her. And then by the time I got to the bottom guy, um, she didn't have any of the luxuries, and she was surrounded by community. Not only her family, but she and her family were working together with neighbors and friends. That's the image, right? Common to all the images of the women um, was the woman standing in the center with all of these other attributes around her. So the woman was the center of the picture, really leaning into why the question, as biased as it was done that way. Like what the question asked, what do you think your life would have been? Who do you think? So the question already, sort of had the participant think about it with them in the center of the picture, right? That's sort of biased. That's a biased question. So this is why it's so important to my researchers out there. You gotta spend significant time. A survey is not just something you decide, oh, I want to ask some people. And of course, you could do that. I mean, particularly if you're not claiming to be a formal research. But I think all of us out there understand, our professionals, that survey is not something we should take lightly. We should have, if you're not a professional in it yourself, you should collaborate with your professionals to ensure you get the right questions for the right thing you want to answer. So enough about that. But so we saw this shift, and I couldn't, it was an exciting conversation, and I can't wait to continue it. But as you can imagine, there's a lot to talk about in that, right? Then as the people started to talk about what their individual submission was in terms of how they imagined their men would be, some of them, which is why we don't record those meetings, some of them, had admitted that, they had an imagination or a desire, but they ended up in a different scenario. And that different scenario, good or bad or whatever, but we did not and do not want to bring anyone's life into disarray or confusion because they are able to speak honestly and have us all grow and learn from it. So I'm sorry I don't have that video for you, but I'm explaining it as best I can. Please be patient. So what I found is that women kept themselves in the center of that conversation. And so to help move the conversation forward, obviously it added another dynamic. I asked them, what about these pictures did they notice? And many of them actually could see right away. The lady is in the middle, and her surroundings is what changed. And they knew that the focus then was just on them. And some of them called that out. And it was really clear if you put contrast to the first picture and the last picture, where you saw this very adorned person surrounded by all these people, maybe not friends or even close, just employees or people, right? Society, but they were holding a glass of something that they thought was sophisticated, what have you, all the way down to the last picture, where the person was just really engaged, really touched, with a hand on the shoulder and friends and really close community. And some people noticed that kind of quickly. I was really excited to see that. But I pulled out the idea that, and here is where we're transitioning from, that's the background, here we were, to really the meat of the conversation that I want to have here with you. I'm going to bring in some information, and then we're going to get to hopefully how we move forward. And this is where I'll insert what the title of this whole thing is. I know you saw it on the web. This is a conversation around the illusion of permanence, right? But because of what happened last week, and it was so relevant, to me, this was so rich. It just really, I couldn't have made a better segue into this week's conversation on the illusion of permanence than to have that relationship conversation with these women and to have it play out like it did. So here we go. I said to the women, did you notice that in all of these outcome scenarios, the woman is right smack center in the focus? And I talked about the contrast that I shared with you, the first picture and the last picture. And then they talked about that a little bit. And some women said, well, we should be. We should be, and some very, all of the people I think were very smart people, very passionate people. They have a mirage of views, which of course flies in the face of society, right? We all look alike, we all have the same culture, which is of course ridiculous. But we saw that play out, the variety, even dichotomy in some cases, the contrast of people from different areas and backgrounds and age groups. But we talked about them being at the center and how no one felt to challenge that despite the images, the contrast images from the first and the last, that suggest that the more you move away from this centered approach of view of yourself toward a communal approach as a participant in a greater society, how that could have an impact on society as you know it in the world you live in. Some women were very reluctant to consider that. No, we women, in the opinions of this case, are the salt of the earth. We're Afro queens, and we should be the center of the pinnacle of society because music and various things have told them that, right? And in some ways, certainly within the subpopulations, that's very true. But the crime, I believe, is when we buy into a construct of society that, of course, speaking specifically that we live in America here, where it puts any individual in the center, you are already wayward. You've already gone astray. You've already walked away from the idea of community, family, however the family dynamics, whatever the matrix is, the idea of a subpopulation having commonality that's so tight, a bond that's so familiar that you are adrift. You are a lone wolf. You can do it by yourself. I think generally speaking, society in the Black community has been speaking out against the idea of I'm a strong woman and I want to go do it alone. Really, there are holdouts, and for reasons they have. But the idea of staying connected to a community that is about you, that is you, that loves you, has strong value. Okay. So as you can imagine, that conversation got more and more intense, an exciting conversation to have. We should do it again sometime, just for more people to participate. But as it got more and more intense, I began inserting some ideas like the one I just did, suggesting that even as you live your life, you should you should replace that central character in the images that you are to become and take out yourself, right? Take out yourself. In fact, take out any person, including your children. Oh man, that's controversial, right? I said you should take out that and replace it with your values, be them spiritually motivated or however. Take out that center character, think about your imagination, or allow your imagination to put your values in the center of that. And we had a lot of fun talking about that because perhaps those values, right, will help us unlearn what we have been taught as Americans, the lone wolf syndrome, the idea, I can do it by myself and that everything is about me, money, 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 right? We know those, right? Perhaps putting your values in the center of that would allow people to think about upstream a bit who they couple themselves with and how that coupling would lead to the fortification and an upholding of whatever those values are. And they don't have to be, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you have to be a Christian, right? In America, there's a lot of us who are not Christians. And we know the story of how our religions play a role in our lives, in history, in wars, and everything else. So I'm not suggesting that it has to be any particular religion. And if your values are made up of something that's not based on your religion, I'm not even having that conversation in this moment. What I'm talking about is whatever your values are, being in the center and allowing that to help you in the choices you make in the case of the 20-year-old, help you sort of think through your life however you age. And quite interestingly, the older participants very much agreed with that suggestion. Okay, so it was intense, and I know many of you wish you were there. So you can maybe make the next one. So here's where things began to turn a bit more. As the values became something more and more embraced as an idea to be in the center of that image, right? And this was, of course, encouraged by the conversation of the group, right? Once that became more and more there were people who felt like, no, this is just not right, okay? And furthermore, okay, someone had to say, you do know, speaking to me, that the conversion, which is the platform we're on, from culture, which is what we've been talking about in terms of our ideas, in terms of how and to whom you would couple, et cetera, the culture we're living in, right? And from culture to culture, which everyone knows by now, is the idea of really having our behaviors, mannerisms, our practices, norms, and things uplift and uphold those things we value, those things that actually protect us, provide insulation and security. So moving from culture to culture, her comments to me were, you do know that the idea of conversion from culture to culture will never happen. Wow. She's saying that, and I'm paraphrasing, Black people will never embrace a society where they're united, they work together, they're doing things that uplift themselves, that protect themselves from harm and outside invasion. She had a lot of reasons. Many of them were very logical. And as that conversation got heated because of what she said, I inserted some support for her because she had, the group was fairly large. So there was pockets of people who shared her opinion. Actually more than I wanted to see, right? But, to help them, I explained, a very decorated political activist and a brilliant man, Dr. Claude Anderson, had, a similar opinion. And he claimed that if Black people were not to change, they'd be permanent second-class citizens. And I don't want to misquote. Please go look it up. Look him up, find out who it is. Brilliant man. But his position is, if Black people did not, let me see if I can quickly find something here, because I would love to quote him, but if I can't, we'll just keep moving, and I may not. Just in a quick review, it talked about Dr. Claude Anderson, a well-known author, political strategist, and so on. And he was recognized for Powernomics and so on. So this show is not about him, but only to give, I intended at that time only to give those women some confidence to understand that the meeting wasn't about, if people don't agree with what the group says, that there's a gang up on. That's not the thing. The thing is for us to have healthy conversation to help us see the direction that would be helpful, and you can adopt it or not. When you go from culture to culture, we know that a whole lot of people are very much embedded and married to a culture that they've been given. And they don't even know, right? They don't know that the religion and the food they eat and the way they live and even the way they think in this wolf syndrome, as I call it, is something that was taught to them and that they embrace and won't ever let go. That's okay. Because guess what? That's going to happen. But there are others who believe that nothing is permanent, which is exactly our topic here today, right? The illusion of permanence, right? So things are permanent until they're not, right? And history, whether you want to look at your religious history or just the history of mankind or what have you, the one lesson that seems pretty consistent over millennia is things will change. You can argue that. You could say, well, maybe society changed in certain ways, but fundamental things didn't change. And they're a little, you know, I mean, there's probably countless ways you can perceive that. And, you know, religious members could say, well, here's what won't change. And they can stand by the religious points. And that's fine. But I think society, socialism, the way we live and interact with one another, that changes. That changes whether your religion stays the same, whether your values stay the same. Society changes. That's very important for all of us to understand. Society can change and you can hold to your religion. Society can change and you can hold to your values. But society will change. And let me tell you why as a few examples. My father was in the Korean War. And as you can imagine, that was a long time ago. So the era in which he was born and lived his life and participated in the war and the time after, during those periods of time, technology was changing the world, right? Discoveries was changing the world. And of course, America, right? America, by that time, was really solidifying itself as the empire of the world. And we, of course, are seeing that we're right in the middle, and by middle, I mean beginning, I should say, the beginning, but it's intently is decided, right? We're moving toward a multipolar world. That's another conversation. But let me stay here. So my father had a set of circumstances. He didn't have a cell phone. He didn't have a powerful computer in hand, right? So how he lived his life socially was in alignment or to the degree that technology allowed him to, and not just technology, but even his colleagues and peers and the way society lived. So we know that even as technology changes, which we're seeing it happen even now, society will change. The way you get a job, where you work, what access you have, what resources you have access to, your amount of travel, healthcare, or that we call it in the United States, which is a whole nother conversation, which is, of course, central to everything that I am and what we talk about and what we're really getting at. But from converging from culture to culture, okay, is telling us that despite cultural settings, despite social norms, that you as a person have an opportunity to hold tight to whatever you preserve as your values, okay, and to create society in the way you live it in your norms, okay, however, whatever era you live in, okay, such that your values are still able to be protected. I hope that resonates with many of you. I hope that we see that despite what society does, despite who believes what, from brilliant researchers and activists to your brother or sister sitting beside you, that you recognize that it is still within your power to embrace culture and demand that everything around you should promote you, should protect you, and should allow you the freedoms and the liberties of humanity. That is your right. And guess what? If ever that's challenged, it may be something within you that says, I'm not certain that the answer is clear if I'm just going to be subject to second-class citizen or relegated to that, or if I'm just going to be stripped of my human liberties or rights, that I'm going to sit quietly and allow that to happen. Not for me or not for my children. But that's a choice you have to make. That's something within you or not. You could, of course, say, I'm okay with being enslaved, or I'm okay with being given just enough so that I feel good about myself in contrast or relation to everybody around me, and therefore, however society works, I'm okay with it. There is infinite variations of how to interpret that thing that you embrace in this conversation. I'll leave that to you. But as I wrap it up, as I come to a close, the illusion of permanence is, in fact, an illusion. Society will change. That's a guarantee. The examples I think I've even talked about before, include political changes. The fall of Rome, right, as an example, the collapse of the Soviet Union, right? There could be technological changes, as we see now. That one is so clear that, as well as the others too, because they're history, real history, not history that maybe has been given to Americans, but if you look at real history and seek it out, because now there are tools using technology, you can actually get to truth. And those of us who care about truth and who still think truth through your values, that's something I encourage you to seek it out. There are many of us, by the way, I'll insert, that don't even care about truth, which is mind-boggling to me. They don't care about truth. They only care about what they've been told, whether it's true or not. That's astounding. But that's research for another time. Let me insert again. Let me double down, as they say. It is an illusion to think that society is permanent for many reasons that I encourage you to research and find out and bring to our conversations and let me hear what you have to say, okay? Comfort in however you've obtained it, either through your political means or through your participation in society as it was or as it is, creates vulnerability because you're comfortable. There is no pressure to change. But as we all know, if you pressurize something, if you heat it up, if you insert air, or if you start to consume the area of a space, then that pressure is going to force change. Okay, either in a way that's constructive, whereas you insert a vowel for release, or a way that might be controversial or eruptive, where the lid pops off because the pressure becomes so intense. But it will change. So I'll summarize real quick, and I hope in some way you'll forgive my passionate need to forego my previously planned out discussion about the illusion of permanence, because I felt that experience with our group this past week was so rich and so relevant and hopefully so attractive in the topic, that you can still hear the conversation. And even though the introduction came through a roundabout way. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I look forward to you participating either in our small meetings where we talk about these things unrecorded. You can be as honest and blunt as you want, no matter what you have to say. That's where we grow. That's where we learn. Or if you want to come on to this session where I may review that conversation and talk about it openly with you, and we go that route. Either way, even if it means that you don't participate in any of them, but you somehow take a moment to listen to what I'm saying, not for any reason, but to consider in your own heart what you think about it. I'm asking you, I'm begging you, in fact, particularly if you're Black of African or African descent, right? To consider forcing yourself and that of people around you, including your children, to embrace an idea of curature. Let your life build your security. Let your life promote your safety. Let your life encourage your growth, your mental growth, your prosperity. You don't have to participate in things of society or culture that harms you or is designed to exploit you. You don't have to do that. You're not alone. We're here. And I thank you for joining me. Until next time, be well.